Hello creeps! Andy here, and today I have an exciting video, I think, for me. But I wanted to share with you my 23 best books I read, my favorite-ish books of 2023. So this is... You good? You good, buddy? So these are all my 5-star reads, my 4.5-star reads, and these are somewhere between 4 and 4.5 stars because I'm annoying and my ratings are like 4.11. Very specific. So obviously there are tons of other books that were in the 4-star category, so I had to limit them to just my 23, tops. But I would like to share them with you, and there's a lot of variety in here and no extreme horror. I'm going to do a whole separate video talking about extreme horror because it's kind of hard to compare that to typical literature, and even in these categories, that's why I've separated them into categories versus my 23rd favorite and then my 22nd favorite, because they're all so different that they're kind of impossible to compare even to each other. So I thought it would be easier if I just break them down into categories and talk about them that way. I have quite a few books to get through, as you can see, so I'm not going to go into a crazy amount of detail for each one, but I will give you a quick synopsis, and then a lot of these are books that just stand out to me, that just made me feel a way that other books hadn't, or that I liked for a specific reason. So I'll do my best to try to include the reasons why I enjoyed at least some of these books that might seem a little bit more strange. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with my 4 to 4.5 stars. The first one I have here is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This is actually the second time I've read this book, I believe, and I did a whole movie versus book on this on my channel, so I'll leave that video linked down below if you would like a little bit more deep analysis of this book. But it's about these two men and they bring their daughter to a cabin in kind of the middle of nowhere. 4 people show up at their door and tell them that if they don't willingly sacrifice one of their own, that the world will end. And so you're kind of going back and forth trying to figure out, is this real, or, are they just a little crazy? This book is so brilliantly written. I really do love Paul Tremblay. He has such an ingenious way of leaving the work up for the reader's interpretation, but also providing you with almost conflicting facts so that you could see how the book could be interpreted either way. The first time I read it, I was like, oh yeah, definitely not the apocalypse, these people are crazy. And the second time I read it, I thought, oh, maybe. And so even, with various times reading it, you get a different interpretation, or at least I did, of the ending of the story. And I just think that he is a genius. I really do. There's a lot under the surface of this book. So if you want more than just surface level type reading, really interesting read. Absolutely love this one. Like I said, I've read it multiple times. So yeah, highly recommend that. The next one might seem kind of random, or not random if you've been here on my channel, but I have I have fallen in love with these cozy mysteries by Addison Moore. They're called Murder in the Mix, and these are the first, this is the first year that I've ever read cozy mysteries in general, and I did kind of a whole video reading a bunch of cozy mysteries, and these ones I just magically found. And they remind me of a book that I would have read when I was younger, maybe junior high, because there's some, supernatural elements in there, and it's about this cute baker that solves a murder in her cute little town. I really don't know how to express to you why or how much I love these books, but they really did just bring back the magic of reading that I felt when I was younger, and I can't exactly put my finger on it other than it was a book that I really would have enjoyed when I was younger. But they're obviously books for adults, and they're a little bit spicier. The 4th one that I read was definitely all about intercourse, but they're not like smut or anything like that, but they're just adorable, and I can't tell you how much joy these books bring me, and I don't care if you think I'm lame, because I love these books. There's just something really magical about them. There's just also something nice about reading these fun little silly cozy mysteries in the middle of intense books, or books that are more analytical or what have you. I just like variety in my life, and I adore these. So that was definitely those were somewhere all in my 4-star reads. The next one is Lucy Foley's The Guest List. This one blew my mind. And again, this is another one where I can't exactly tell you what I enjoyed about it. I just really loved the entire book. It just kept me so engaged. And there's some books where you just cannot put them down, and at the end you finish it in a day or two and you go, oh, that was a great book. And there's no other way to explain it other than it just kept me so engaged. It's more of a slow burn. It's about this couple that gets married on kind of this remote island. So you have a few of the guests coming, and there may or may not be somebody who may or may not have been murdered, and you kind of go along and try to figure out, you know, who done it. But it's just an interesting setup for a story. To me, it didn't feel overdone. You know how sometimes you read thrillers and you're like, really, it was the cat? You know what I mean? This one did not feel like that. I felt like it all made sense and it all came back around. There's a whole bunch of character development in here, so you really get to know each of the characters. And then, yeah, things kind of wrap up at the end. I was blown away by this. I'm on my third Lucy Foley book now. I mean, I will be starting it this week. So I've just kind of, yeah, fallen in love with her books. So this was one that really stood out to me. Another one, This Perfect Day by Ira Levin. And this book, again, blew me away. It's about this thing called the family. So everybody's in the family, but the family kind of controls you. It's like a dystopian, futuristic type story. But there's so many different things, again, to analyze in here, where they have people that are trying to break loose of the family and trying to get away from the family. But then you start to question what really is better and what is more helpful to humanity and what breaking free from the family actually means. I just loved this one. I thought it was so interesting, especially because the only other Ira Levin book that I have read has been Rosemary's Baby. Obviously, I adored that one, but this one was just so different from that, and I really enjoy sci-fi. So that was another one that absolutely blew me away. Now let's move on to my 4.5 star reads, and let's just get into it. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. This is, I don't know, the third or fourth time that I've read this book. I wanted to make a video in the beginning of the year. It was probably out during summer, where I ranked the only books I've ever rated 5 stars. And I read a bunch of books that I knew I liked because I wasn't sure if they were, 4.5, 5-star reads. I wanted to be very specific with that video. I will again leave that one linked down below if you are interested. But for this one, it's a solid 4.5 read for me. I love Hunter S. Thompson. He's got some amazing novels, and also his way of writing, his gonzo way of writing, where he takes like a journalistic approach but adds emotion in with it, which seems contradictory, but somehow Hunter S. Thompson pulls it off. He's just an interesting character, but I'm sure you guys know what this is about. It's a story about him and his attorney going to Vegas, and just debauchery ensues. It's a wild ride. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen the movie, but I do highly recommend the book if you haven't read it just yet. It's a savage journey to the heart of the American dream. It is really an interesting read, an absolute wild book, and yeah, I love Hunter S. Thompson's work, so he is definitely up there in terms of my literary appreciation and respect and admiration. So the next one is actually Let the Right One In by John Lindquist, and this one I just read. I have a lot to say. I took lots of notes, and so I will talk about this in my reading wrap-up in more detail, but I absolutely adored, loved, oh my gosh, I loved this book so much. It was fantastic. It is about, it is a vampire story, and it is about a young boy who's kind of a loner, doesn't have many friends, gets bullied and picked on, and next door moves in this young girl who happens to be a vampire, and the story kind of continues from there. But it is so much different than the movie, and in fact, I watched the movie so long ago, I don't even know which version I watched, but I can tell you I loved the book a whole lot more. I absolutely adored this, and again, I will go into more detail, but this was like almost a perfect book for me, like a really fantastic read, and I highly recommend it to you horror lovers. But I will say that it is, I think, a little bit more intense than a typical horror book. There's some elements in there that I was shocked by, and I've read some foul stuff this year, but it does even have a lot of the same elements as an extreme horror book, where, there are, how can I say this without getting demonetized, people in the sex worker industry that are below the age of 18, so like forcibly. And oh man, there's some tough parts to read in that story. Like it really is a tough read. So I don't recommend it to everybody, but for the people who enjoy maybe a little bit more, it's not extreme horror, but a little bit more, you know, towards that realm of things that are probably outside of the norm of general typical horror books, I would suggest that one. Again, another one. This is George Bataille, A Story of the Eye. This book was just an interesting read. I love reading various types of literature. You might be able to tell from this list. And reading a book like this from the 1920s really did just make me look at literature differently. This, of course, can be analyzed in various ways from a philosophical point of view or what have you. But obviously the way that I look through things is through a literary lens. I mean, that's where my degree is from in literature. So that's how I look at books, and I do think that this book just hit me in a different way than a lot of books that I read this year did. It really surprised me, and it's not a horror book by any means, and it's not an extreme horror book or anything, but there definitely are some extreme scenes like castration and stuff like that in it. So again, I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but yeah, this book really surprised me, and it definitely got me into exploring more experimental literature. And I have since, through this book, gotten a bunch of other kind of books that would be interpreted as more strange or weird or out of the realm of typical literature. So I'm very excited to dive into those books in this new coming year. So yeah, that was a solid 4.5. Another one for me is Whispers in the Mist by Darcy Coates. A lot of her books were in the 4-star realm for me, but this one stood out. This is actually the third in the Black Winter series, but I love that entire series. But I think the reason I love this one is because I have known the characters for the past 2 books, and it was really interesting to see kind of where they went in this book. I don't read a whole lot of series of books, but I can see why people love them. You know, you do get to really know the characters, and if the series is done right, I think it can be a really interesting thing. I could not put this book down. I just couldn't. It was a lot of fun. You have 2 main characters throughout the series, and in the first book you get kind of their introduction. In the second book you get kind of more action and adventure where they're going out and exploring, and in the third book you get a lot more like heart-wrenching, messed up stuff. So I really love this one. I enjoyed it. And yeah, like I always say, you know, it's the lighter books versus the more extreme books. The lighter ones are the ones that mess me up more. I had dreams of the upcoming apocalypse for weeks after reading this. I mean, the inevitable apocalypse, you know. I really don't want to give too much away, but it's something happens, and it's kind of like an apocalyptic tale of society falling apart. That's all I'll say for that one. But highly recommend the whole series if you guys are interested in something. It's not zombies or anything, but it's something, you know, like monsters. It's kind of like that. The next one that I would say was a 4.5 star was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This book blew me away. I honestly was really surprised. I had read other Riley Sager books this year, and I did really enjoy them. I mean, I've enjoyed most, I would say, of the ones that I've read from him this year, but this one was, to me, far above the rest. I enjoyed the main character. She's a girl who, at a summer camp when she was young, her other bunkmates left in the middle of the night and were never heard from again. And so however many years later, maybe it's like 20-ish years later or something like that, she goes back to the camp to try to make amends and get some closure, and she starts finding clues of what was left behind when these girls left all those years ago and what could have potentially happened to them. And it is a really interesting book. I loved the main character. I really think that Riley Sager does write some interesting female characters, and he does have a way of really bringing out, like especially in this book, I don't know, just the feeling of loneliness and not really fitting in as a young girl, and then seeing these older, cooler girls that you want to be like. I don't know, it's something about his characters stand out to me in some of his books, but this one in particular really surprised me. You guys know it's hard for a thriller book to like really get me, and this one got me. The next one I read was Simone St. James' The Broken Girls. Again, another one that just really surprised me. It's about these group of girls in the 1950s, and they're in boarding school, and they're all there for reasons because either their family didn't want them or they've caused trouble or they're more like problem students. And then you go up into 2014 where there's a journalist. Oh, interesting. Her last name's Sheridan. I wonder if that's like a nod to Sheridan LaFanu, the writer of Carmilla. Anyway, sorry. It felt different from anything I'd ever read before. It's in the horror section, but there's definitely some mystery, some thriller in there. There's even some supernatural, but I tend to kind of not really enjoy supernatural books all that much, ghosts and stuff, for a variety of reasons. But with this one, because the ghosts kind of are in the background and they just add creepy elements to the story without overpowering the story or making it so unrealistic, I really enjoyed that. And yeah, so you get this main girl, her sister has been murdered and her body was dumped in the area of that school that was in the 1950s. So she learns that the school actually has been bought and may actually be run as a business again. So she does more digging to try to figure out what exactly, I don't know, happened in the school and things like that. But yeah, I don't know, it was really interesting. Again, a lot of character development, you get to know the girls a lot, and something about this, there's a lot of lore around the school that's mixed in with the story, which, you know, is what happens to turn out to be more of the supernatural elements. A story that really stood out to me this year, again, one of those, maybe I can't pinpoint exactly why, but it just made me feel different than any other book did. This one is Tess Gerritsen's The Surgeon. This book was written in, I think, the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, 2001. And this is the first time reading it. And I think the reason why this one blew me away is because I really love Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon. Not so much Hannibal, but I really love those first two books so much. I mean, they just are fantastic novels. And this one definitely gave me that same feel that I felt reading Silence of the Lambs, of just like, wow, this is awesome. That, you know, cop versus bad guy type of book. And this is about a serial killer that is killing women and removing their uteruses. Yeah, real nice dude. And there's a woman who killed the serial killer, but now there seems to be some sort of copycat and she gets involved in it. She's, I believe, a surgeon. And then there are cops that are also involved in it. This actually was the book that started the Rizzoli and Isles, what do you call it, series? I've never seen that, but this book was fantastic. I've read, I think I'm on number 4 in the series, and don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed them all. Maybe with the exception of 2 wasn't really my favorite, but I love that first one. I mean, that one was just fantastic. Another one that I love was Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. This book blew me away. I had no idea what this was going into it. So it's from 1962 and it gave rise to the exorcism on page, on screen, and even in real life. And it is a story about an exorcism, but not really. So I don't go into it thinking that it's about exorcisms, because I think there's a lot of comment on so much more than that about the church and society. There's a lot going on in here, but truly it is in the horror section, but it is a lot of mystery as well. But man, this book just really hit me in a way that a book hasn't in a long time. It really shocked me and I absolutely adored this. Again, I like reading older literature to see what inspired new stuff, you know, and this was before The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, all sorts of stuff. Again, it's not really an exorcism tale. I think it's about more than that, but a fantastic read and a super short book. But yeah, absolutely adored that one. The next one, Bret Easton Ellis's The Shards. I mean, what can I say about this? This is a new Bret Easton Ellis book that came out, and I believe his only other horror book other than American Psycho. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I love Bret Easton Ellis. He's one of my favorite writers, and this book blew me away. I will say I won't recommend it for everybody, and I think that if you're not a fan of Bret Easton Ellis and his writing style, nor have you read his works before, I don't know how you would feel about this. But if you've read Less Than Zero and you've read American Psycho, this book is somewhere in the middle, and it's so interesting and kind of a fusion of the two books prior. So it's not as intense as American Psycho, but it is very nihilistic the way Less Than Zero is, and it's about a group of high school students kind of, you know, living their sad little nihilistic lives, much like Less Than Zero, although I believe they just graduated high school in that book. But there's some really messed up stuff in here. But the thing that really blew me away about this is his unreliable narrators are just amazing. I'm trying to think of another book that has this unreliable of a narrator. I really can't. It's about Bret Easton Ellis in high school, so he uses himself as the main character. There's a bunch of killings going on that they attribute to a serial killer, and then there's also this weird kind of like cult thing that's popping up, and then you have Bret Easton Ellis and his friends who kind of seem to get involved with one or maybe the other of what's going on. You also get to see the main character, Bret himself, kind of spiral into drug use and unpredictability, and he becomes increasingly less, what am I trying to say? He becomes more unreliable as the story continues. What an amazing, interesting read. But again, if you just pick this one up and you're not a fan of Bret Easton Ellis, I truly, like, you're on your own. I don't know how you'll feel about that one. And the next one and the last one in this specific category is The Whisper Man by Alex North. Again, this one really blew me away. This one was like Silence of the Lambs mixed with other books. I don't know. I just feel like if you talk about somebody in jail and a cop talking to him, automatically you're like, oh, Silence of the Lambs, you know? So it's not really like it's like that book, but there is that teeny tiny element in there of a serial killer who does communicate with cops like once or twice. It's not even, you know, throughout the whole story, but I think that's why it's probably in my head attributed or connected to in some way Silence of the Lambs. But it's so much more than that. It's about young boys. I can't remember actually if it's young boys or young children, but it's about young people, whoever they are, getting abducted and murdered, and before they go missing they hear whispering outside of their windows at night. It's about this man whose son starts acting really weird, doing insane creepy things, kind of creeping him out. It's about the cops that are trying to solve these murders. It's about a lot of interlinking things, so it's definitely more than just cop bad guy. And yeah, really blew me away. I really loved that book. Now let's move on to my 5-star reads. Oh, this one I should talk about last. I'm talking about them kind of in order of how I read them throughout the year. 5-star reads are difficult for me because that means it's perfect. Every word is perfect. Like if you had written it, you would have changed nothing. Everything is amazing, perfect. You know, so those are hard for me, and that's why usually the books that I really like are 4.5 stars. But sometimes a book comes along that deserves a 5-star rating, and these are my 5-star books of this year. And the first one here is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastryk. I know that this is a controversial book and people either love it or hate it, but I gotta tell you, this book really changed a lot for me. I adored this book. I really did. I loved it. And it's about this illness, this disease that comes and infects all of the livestock, so people aren't allowed to eat meat anymore. So they start raising humans for consumption, which divides the humans into the people that consume humans and then the people that are consumed by humans. This book though, I mean, there's so much under the surface here. For me personally, for me it wasn't necessarily about the meat itself. Like it wasn't for me a comment on the meat industry, although that is part of the story. But I looked at it through the lens of government overreach and who you can really trust and how quickly the population just becomes assimilated to really messed up things. There's a lot to take away from this book. I can understand why people don't like it, but I also get the hype. The next one I actually don't have. Someone is borrowing it. They've been borrowing it for a long time, but it is Black Mouth by Ronald Malfi. Again, that book truly changed so much for me. Oh man, that book was fantastic. I would not have changed one word in that story. It was amazing. I'm so thankful that I got introduced to Ronald Malfi. Well, I just picked up his book one day at the Barnes & Noble, but I'm so thankful that I did because I have one of my new favorite authors this year, and that is him. So Black Mouth is about a man who's struggling with addiction, and he ends up going back to his hometown, connecting with older friends, and they're trying to work through some weird, strange things that happened when they were kids, and it leads them on this whole thing. But the reason I love Ronald Malfi so much is because you can see the pain in his stories, and I think that that is something unique, not to storytelling in general, and not even necessarily to horror, but a lot of the times the horror elements overshadow the pain of what the writer is experiencing in the books that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there are plenty where you can kind of feel that pain and it is so visceral for you to read, but his books really did change a lot for me. I don't know, and maybe it's because of my past, not that I have an issue with addiction or anything, but just from, you know, I won't get into it, but I think because I made a personal connection with his books that I really felt the pain in them, and it just inspires me so much as a reader, as a writer, to see somebody take obvious pain from their life and turn it into something so fucking beautiful. And that's how I feel about Ronald Malfi's books. Amazing, 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 amazing author. The next one is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Again, completely understand the hype behind this one. Fantastic read. It's about a man who's kind of looking at his life and wondering what would have become had he focused on his career as a scientist instead of having children or having a child and getting married. He then ends up getting abducted and taken away from his family, and then does everything he can to try to reconnect with his family. I have never read a book like this before. In fact, every Blake Crouch book that I read, I go, I have never read a book like this before. Truly one unique storyteller. I absolutely love his work, and this book stood out for me again because I connected with the character so much. That sort of dichotomy of like, you know, what do you do? Do you pursue your dreams and goals, or do you settle down and have a kid? That is a real thing that you know, a lot of us in our 30s, I think, are contemplating. And so I really did connect with the story so much. And although I loved every book that I read of his, I really did connect with these characters specifically. And that's why this one is a 5-star read for me. Another one, Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. Holy crap, I cannot express to you how much I loved this book, how much this book destroyed me. This is an interesting story of about a man. He was in World War II. He was a propagandist for the Nazi Party, right? But then you come to find out that through his propaganda, he was actually giving messages to the US. So it's kind of this weird gray line of morality, because on one hand, you're like, this guy said the most horrible, horrendous things. Nobody can be forgiven for that, you know? But then you come to find out that through that, he was actually helping take down the Nazi Party, and you never quite know where he stands. And so this is an interesting book. It's also very painful to read. This book did get to me. It got to me. But Kurt Vonnegut, obviously one of my favorite writers, and that I think might be my favorite Vonnegut book that I've read. So these next two are, again, what I was saying earlier, where I had read books that I had read previously because I wanted to see if they were 5-star reads for that video. So I reread Fight Club for the 20 millionth time by Chuck Palahniuk. And I have always loved Fight Club. I've always loved Palahniuk's work. I mean, I went through a Palahniuk phase. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but that's just like, you know, I was reading his work before I could just Google how to pronounce his name. So that's just always how I've said it, but you can correct me if I'm saying it incorrectly. But anyways, I went through a Palahniuk phase. He was all I read in high school, him and Stephen King. I mean, I was obsessed with him, and I had every book he ever wrote. And I've always liked Fight Club, but I think this year I really discovered the genius of Fight Club. I made a whole video kind of dissecting the work and talking about it in more of an analytical sense. So I'll leave that one linked down below if you guys want to check that one out. I don't think I have to give too much information, like everybody knows what Fight Club's about, but truly a genius book and a 5-star read. Again, another one that I've read, Albert Camus' The Stranger. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Not a horror book. I think Albert Camus was a French philosopher, if I'm not mistaken. And so this book was first published in 1946 and is one of the most interesting books I have ever read. Our main narrator is, would misanthrope be a correct way? I believe that would be a correct word to describe him, but he's also extremely nihilistic and just complacent in ways that I cannot understand. This is one character where every time I read this book, I just don't get him. And he gets even more and more interesting. You get to see just kind of like his life. Well, it's kind of in two parts. You get his life prior to being on trial for murder and then post being on trial for murder. Both are very interesting, and he doesn't care either way where he is or what he's doing. Starts out at his mom's funeral. He could not care less. In fact, his only complaint about the day is the weather, and not even about the fact that his mom is dead. It is one of the most interesting books I've ever read. Absolutely adore that book. I think I've read it a few times now, and I'll probably read it once a year or so because it is one of my favorites. One that I got introduced to was Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu this year. So this again was one that I just picked up at Barnes & Noble. I read it and I fell in love with this book. This is one of the best vampire books I have still ever read. 5-star read, absolutely love it. It was serialized from 1871 to 1872. So this is a book from the late 1800s about vampires that is still better than most modern day vampire stories. This book blew me away. It's so atmospheric, and it's interesting to kind of see the similarities and differences that it has with modern day vampire stories. There is so much that I adored about this book, and I think eventually I will do a vampire book ranking, probably next year sometime. So keep an eye out for that, and I will go into why I love that book so much. I actually want to reread that one again already because it was that good. Last two. Okay, next up, Ronald Malfi's Come With Me. Absolutely adored this book. This book made me sob. Oh man, this book is another one where you really do feel his emotions. At the end, he even tells you where the inspiration from the story came from and how he was having a difficult time with the passing of someone. As you guys know, I have been struggling pretty intensely for the past however long with the death of both of my parents. So although this is about the death of his wife, it still brought up a lot of those same emotions and feelings of just like grief and loss and guilt and all the horrendous, awful things that you experience when somebody has passed away. So if you're grieving, I honestly highly recommend this one. I really enjoy reading books about grief because it is such a universal thing that we all eventually will go through at one time. And it's just honestly amazing that we make it to the other side, because at times it feels unbearable. And this book really went on to express that. So it's about a husband. His wife is killed in an unfortunate accident. And so he ends up finding something that she had been hiding from him. He's like, why does she have this? What's going on? And so he goes into this whole story trying to look into what she was hiding from him when she was alive. Oh my gosh, a fantastic book. It really did break my heart, and I loved every second. It evoked so much emotion, and that's really all you can ask from a book, you know? And the last one that I read, which is actually the last book that I just read, was David Grann's The Wager, a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. And holy crap, this book was fantastic. Now, this is a nonfiction book, so I will say when I first picked it up, it took me a minute to kind of get in the rhythm of reading, because I have read historical fictions before, and I do enjoy historical fictions like The Terror. It's one of my favorite books ever written. However, because this author does not or tries not to take any liberty and tries to just give you the facts of what happened during this voyage in 1742, there is no emotion. And the only references that he has besides papers or whatever that was written on the subject were the actual accounts from the men on board the ship, which you would think would give you some emotion, but they were more logs than journals. It wasn't like, dear diary, today I'm shipwrecked, I'm sad. You know, it was like, you know, July 2nd, 5 men died, here are their names. It was pretty rough. It was a rough read, and just this, I just love reading what these men had to endure in the 17 and 1800s, voyaging the sea. Like, what balls you would have to go out on the sea, to be like, I don't know if we'll make it back, and just the horrendous, awful things that accompany it: mutiny, malnutrition, starvation, murder, cannibalism. Just, I mean, the list goes on and on. I am so excited to talk about this in my monthly wrap-up. So stay tuned for that if you want a little bit more information on The Wager. But I would say if you love history, if you love just the facts, and if you are okay with the emotions being held back, and you enjoy, just kind of sea life, that might be the book for you. So those, my friends, are the top 23 books I read in 2023. I know I have a kind of a strange variety of the stuff that's going on in here, but I mean, mostly the same stuff: horror, thriller, some mystery, some science fiction. So I guess it's kind of true to the books that I enjoy, but maybe I threw some curveballs in here. Let me know your favorite books that you read this year. Also, I read so many great, amazing books, and it was really hard to pick the top 23, so I will do a whole other video sometime soon where I show you every book that I've read this year. And yeah, let me know which ones surprised you, which ones you have read out of these, and your favorites of the year. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye, guys.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.